writes, it is that we live in a world today dominated by ideas, beliefs, claims, magic, systems, rules that are born out of those turning points in those areas. And because of that, we want to speak of those things to understand more about truly what happened and why. As I said, why do these ruling elite see the world in such disdain? Why do the ruling elite seem to have this mind virus of great hate towards the divine? And I hope to explain that in unveiling some of the history now. Well, let's begin then with something that we can look up, we can see for ourselves. I'm sure most people have heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And this is a project that has been going on for far too long in terms of publishing, where a series of scrolls are found in the caves above a ruin known as Qumran that used to be on the shoreline of the Dead Sea. And in those caves they found many dozens of complete and undisturbed scrolls. Somehow between finding these complete scrolls and beginning the process, it appears that these scrolls suddenly disintegrated into hundreds of thousands of pieces like a puzzle, and that is the excuse we've been given now as to why it's taken 40 years. Well, one thing we can see, and we can be certain of, is that of all the artifacts that they found in these caves, the most sacred artifact of those that lived at Qumran, that we now believe were known as the Essene sect, was an artifact that we now call the Copper Scroll. The Copper Scroll gives an outline of a treasure hunt, speaking in terms of talents, talent being an old measure, a measure that the Egyptians, and indeed the Holy, viewed as a measure of gold, somewhere around 33 kilograms. And the Copper Scroll writes out where these talents were supposed to be located. For years, people studied this document and could not make heads nor tail as to the particular area that this treasure map was referring, until one scholar took the map and measured it perfectly against the ruins of the former capital of the pharaoh Akhenaten of Egypt, the father of Tutankhamun, and found that the ruins of Amarna, Tel Amarna, the former capital of Akhenaten, fit perfectly the description and the dimensions in the Copper Scroll. But there's one more thing of note about the Copper Scroll, and that's why I raise it now. Because in the margin of this most important artifact of the Dead Sea Scrolls, one of the most important historical artifacts of the state of Israel, in ancient Greek, is written the message: Akhenaten is also Zadok. I repeat that. Akhenaten is also Zadok. Well, before we unmask that mystery of an artifact that anyone on this call can go and see, let us find some further information about this mysterious figure Akhenaten, this pharaoh Akhenaten, that we do know. One of the byproducts of the Genome Project has been the unlocking of many of the genomes of not only species but also virus. And one of the virus and illness that they have unlocked is the origin of the plague, the scourge that caused so much misery and death in Europe over millennia. And what they've been able to do is they've been able to establish that the bubonic plague has a point of origin. And far from this being a disease that has been around for tens of thousands of years, they've been able to establish that the bubonic plague originates from around 1350 BCE from the Nile River rats as the carrier. This is ground zero and point zero for the bubonic plague. And in parallel to that, although this is something that is not widely publicly known, science has also been able to establish that certain people carry within their genetic makeup a natural immunity to the bubonic plague. And it is called, amongst other things, the CCR5 receptor deformity. The CCR5 receptor deformity. And what this means is that those that have this CCR5 receptor feature, particularly if they inherit it from both the parent, male and female, are immune not only to the bubonic plague, but are also immune to a range of other of the most infamous pandemic diseases, including but not limited to smallpox, influenza, Spanish flu or swine flu, and indeed the most modern of these, HIV, AIDS. It turns out that the people that have the highest number of CCR5 are found, believe it or not, in Ireland, in parts of England, Wales, Scotland, Germany, parts of France, and then in diminishing numbers in parts of North Africa and the Middle East. And when they've studied these people, a paper last year actually made the astounding claim that these people are regarded as descendants of Akhenaten and his court. Well, if you've read the Bible, you would almost certainly know of the passages leading up to Exodus of the great plagues of Egypt, where God punished the Egyptians because of their imprisonment of the Israelites, and the Israelites, in the very worst of the plagues, escaped from the clutches of the Pharaoh. What we now know is that Akhenaten, as a historical figure, actually did leave with his court from Amarna to save Egypt by taking the plague victims personally into the Sinai. And when there were survivors, after failing in a coup to return to power, moved and captured the city of Ergarit on the Palestinian coast, southern Syria. And this city eventually was captured by the Ramesses, who were a different group from the Ixos kings who followed and came from the city of Menes or Mendes. What we can now see in this message in the copper scroll is a message through time that the ruling elite have known for a long, long time. But as knowledge is power, they didn't want us to know. The message akhenaten is also Zadok. Zadok being the founder of the priest lines of the Sadducees, a nickname for Moses, is that akhenaten, an Egyptian pharaoh, is the historical Moses, the founder of monotheism, the founder of the religion of Yahudism, the worship of Yah, the worship of Aten, the worship of the single God. Now, why is this important? This is important because in the history of the world, and the world can be measured by many things. It can be measured by the change of climate. It can be measured by empires. But it can also be measured by a much darker force, and that is the force of plague, death, of pestilence. And as I explained to you, there is now irrefutable medical proof that certain groups of people carry within them a legacy from the time of Akhenaten, being the survivors of the plague, and thereby carrying a natural immunity to a range of pandemics that would otherwise kill them and kill their neighbours. And what do you think happens when a plague comes to town, whether it be smallpox, bubonic plague, or influenza, when all the people around you die and you don't? What do you think happens to those other souls who survive in their attitude towards you? Of course, that's right. They would view you as possessing some kind of supernatural power. They would view that in superstition that you have something that they don't. They would fear you. They may even be jealous of you. And in a country as superstitious as Egypt, indeed, you would be seen as a prize of your own. And from the time of the bubonic plagues and the time of Akhenaten making the choice to save Egypt and leave his throne, every single turning point in history to the present day can be measured by that moment of history. And I'm about to show you why. The Ramses pharaohs who took over from the Ixos were not Ixos. They hark from the kingdom of the Mani. Now, the Mani were a great and indeed one of the pioneering civilizations of history. They're sometimes called the Saharans, and they carried kingdoms from Morocco right across North Africa, and they were giants. They were magnificent, magnificent looking human beings. But as climate changed, they became more and more isolated and eventually found themselves vassals, primarily in military roles, for the Ixos kings.